Arn Anderson of World Championship Wrestling. A message to you young athletes out there. There are no shortcuts in this life. If you want to be a winner, if you want to be a champion, stay off the steroids. A little short-term gain for the long-term liability of losing your health isn't worth it to any of you. So whether you like me or you don't like me, take my word on this. Do it the easy way. Do it the right way. Earn all your successes, not steroids.
Arn, did you ever get on the gas? And if not, why?
Well, if I did, then the manufacturers of the gas should be sued because it didn't work. Never got on the gas, but it does work. I don't encourage it. I do know that if used in the right ways and in the proper dosages and under a doctor's care, can be beneficial to healing. If you abuse it, overuse it, or you just use it to get bigger and stronger and abuse it that way, it can have long-term health issues.
The exact history of drugs in professional wrestling is unknown, but their impact on the professional wrestling industry seems like a shadow forever destined to follow wherever the industry leads. Some rose to unprecedented heights thanks to their indulgences in bulking up. Others found their careers tumble from high peaks to lowly valleys, and some sadly found themselves 6 feet deep.
My pension plan I can't take out till I'm 65. I'm not going to make 65. Let's just face facts, guys.
While the professional wrestling industry has made some valid attempts to clean up its act, the notion that the industry is clean is not without a variety of visual indicators to suggest otherwise.
So throughout the years in WWF, okay, have I been approached? Well, I guess so, maybe indirectly, but my reputation stood me above all the other critiques of how it was, okay? In other words, the guys knew whatever. I mean, I was always dealt like I'm dealing with you, always like fair, square, and right to the point, okay? And as far as that goes, did I ever have to sell anybody? Not really. Did I ever see anybody put steroids in their butt, their arm? No, never did. Okay, because as a role of my doctor, as the doctor, I never saw any of that stuff.
Is the WWE steroid-free, drug-free?
I don't think that there's any organization in the world, be it entertainment or be it sport, that can tell you that they are totally drug-free.
Professional wrestling has been a cosmetic endeavor dating back to the times of George Hackenschmidt, thanks to non-wrestling predecessors like Eugene Sandow demonstrating that muscles make money in entertainment. There have always been attraction aspects to the forum, but looking like a Greek statue or superhero come to life will always play a part in a business where the outcome is predetermined and broadcast on visual mediums to larger and larger audiences. Imposing behemoths of giant mass translate no matter what languages the viewer understands.
We have over 800 million social media followers across all platforms. We're the second most viewed YouTube channel in the world. Wow.
Obtaining such a look has never been an easy task, requiring dedication and years of effort. In the 1940s, a shortcut to obtain such results in a shorter time frame began to form. Sometime in the late 1950s to early 1960s, steroids made their way into professional wrestling, likely due to the crossover between their entrance into the weightlifting community sharing gyms with professional wrestlers. Rick Drayson, Marlboro Man, training partner of Arnold Schwarzenegger and trainee of Mae Young, has discussed all that was available to him during the 1960s. The supply was plentiful and potent.
Back in the day of the 60s, 70s, 80s, mostly the 70s, I think, and how they compare to today's steroids. Now, I was telling Rich back, I'm going to go back to 1963 when I was training. I was able to get Dianabol made by CIBA, C-I-B-A, little bottle, little blue pills for $8 a 100. And you didn't need a prescription. Well, you did need a prescription, but they were legal. I mean, the doctor, my doctor would order me a bottle of 100, or the pharmacist give me a bottle of 100. I'd take 2 a day and I got huge. Yeah. Huge. And it was only a 5-milligram pill. Funny story, if I was wrestling at the Olympia Auditorium, Dr. Bernhard Schwartz, ringside doctor, he treated all the wrestlers. He always had handfuls of tetracycline and anything for the flu medication, whatever you wanted. So I said, I need some Dianabol. He says, have the pharmacy call me. He was kind of a gruff old guy, just have the pharmacy call me. So I went to what was then, I believe, Thrifty's. I happened to know the pharmacist. I said, please call Dr. Schwartz, and I want to get a bottle of 100 D-ball. He says, okay. He puts the call in, and Dr. Schwartz answers his phone. Hello. He was always busy. Hello, is this Doc Schwartz? Yeah, I have Rick Drayson here. Give him anything he wants. I said, what do you say? He said, give him anything he wants. I said, I want 100 D-ball. And this is how we got our stuff.
Yet within the industry as a whole, Whatever influence the physical enhancement scene had did not seem to explode until the 1970s thanks to the success of superstar Billy Graham. Graham had become a heavy steroid user in the 1960s, long before he entered the professional wrestling business, thanks to his interest in bodybuilding.
I was bench pressing 600 pounds, JR, when very few men in the world could bounce that off of their chest.
Right. Wow. That's amazing.
At this time, Graham states people were unaware of the long-term effects of what is commonly known as juicing in professional wrestling, and they took them freely without fear. They were legal and able to be prescribed, a situation that would end up nearly collapsing the WWF some 20 years later. The influence of Graham's physique cannot be understated. His look and gift of gab, despite limited in-ring talents, made him large sums of money in an era where guaranteed contracts were non-existent.
As far as being an innovative character and leading to so many people, Paul Heyman, DDP, Hulk Hogan, Jesse Ventura, I mean, they all became big fans. Billy Graham was a really important figure in the history of the business that a lot of people don't realize now, you know, and a big trendsetter.
People took notice, and Graham freely told his colleagues how to get bigger. One of the men who heard the message, even before Graham had directly told him, was Terry Bollea, who the world would come to know as Hulk Hogan.
I said, keep on trying and don't give up. And so, sure enough, obviously, he became Hulk Hogan.
So he had already been taking steroids before he ever got into the pro wrestling?
Oh, he told me he'd been taking steroids for 1 full year at the time I met him. And I had been taking steroids for 5 years before I started wrestling in the mid-'60s.
But the things that I am not is I'm not a steroid abuser, and I do not use steroids.
But Hulk Hogan's former teammates have a very different story to tell about his past abuse of steroids.
I myself personally have injected Hulk Hogan with anabolic steroids.
Before we begin down the destructive ends of steroids in wrestling, let us also note that the schedule and lifestyle of wrestling is not an easy one. Without the help of steroids, it likely would not have been possible for many to have survived, let alone thrived.
This person here wants to know, was there ever a more grueling schedule wrestlers had to work than WWF in the 80s?
I would say no. That was the worst I've ever seen. You got your flight from your home to your start date. And then, you know, if you had to fly to other cities, they would fly you. If it was more than however many 100 miles it was the rule at the time. I don't know. I think it might have been 500 miles. And, you know, 500 miles in a day, that's a hell of a trip. That's, you know, you're talking a 7-hour trip probably, right? 8 hours, 9 hours even, you know, depending on traffic and where you're, you know, what part of the country you're in. Like, you could do Miami, Florida, and Seattle, Washington the next day and then cross over to Chicago and then go to Dallas, Texas. I mean, it wasn't laid out like it is now. It was insane. But the idea that guys were on the road for 30 and 40 days in a row, that happened because a lot of times it's just like, you know, why fly home when, you know, you're, you know, the flight home and then the flight back, or, you know, if you lived on the West Coast, you know, it's going to take you a day anyway. So why do it? And you got to pay for your own flight home, which was just insane, but that's how it was.
I wrestled with my MCL blown out and 3 broken ribs, and I wrestled that way for 6 months because I became the champion. You're gone 300 days a year, and you're miserable climbing the walls and in the locker room, waiting to come through the curtain in a different town every night that is exactly the same as the night before.
The WWE schedule is a tough one, and coming off of doing, you know, every single week, 4 to 7 days a week. We do 4 days a week if we're in country and 7 days a week if you're out of country, if you're going on these international tours. Remember the first international tour I did, we did 21 shows, we did 19 shows in 21 days. And we were in a different country every night, in a different city, in a different state. And just stuff like that is crazy.
Steroids would help with the pain and recovery from injuries many, if not all, performers in the squared circle would endure on a professional level. This is by no means an excuse for what would ultimately end up leading to many tragedies. It is simply an acknowledgement of the situation.
A lot of my idols growing up and the wrestlers that I looked up to and watched as a little kid, you know, they passed away at an early age, you know, probably most of them. That just shows how grueling and how hard the sport really is and how much toll it takes on your body. It's definitely a hard road.
Hulk Hogan would become one of the largest names in professional wrestling thanks to his positively all-American attitude and a physique that made a 6'6" frame appear even more massive. His consistent promotion of his 24-inch pythons, while extolling the virtues of saying your prayers and eating your vitamins, became well-known catchphrases, but the truth was Hulk's physique was due in large part to anabolic steroids. As already mentioned, he was not the first to recognize the gains that could be made abusing steroids, but thanks to the power of the WWF's national expansion circumventing long-standing traditions within the professional wrestling industry, Hulk Hogan became a worldwide phenom. His success ushered in a change in professional wrestling across North America.
A large percentage of today's roster could not even, get a push. In the old days, even though they're much better wrestlers than the guys who were getting pushes in the old days, because it was a complete body business. It's not a body business anymore.
There was a time where everybody had to be like,
you had to be clean?
No, you had to be big.
Jacked.
You had to be jacked.
The era of pudgy and less than stellar physique performers was pushed aside by Vincent Kennedy McMahon's empire being built on the jacked up shoulders of Hulk Hogan in a national wrestling promotion that was broadcast around the world. The WWF, now WWE, quickly became awash in men with seemingly more and more muscles. Down south, WWF's largest competitor, the NWA, which would become WCW, the success of Hogan did not go unnoticed, but their fanbase, traditionally the South, was not exactly keen on Hogan's act or substandard wrestling performances.
You'd have to be a moron not to expect that you're going to get an adverse reaction, you're going to get a negative reaction from hometown hardcore former NWA, current WCW fans when the WWF guy comes to town.
They had been raised on a steady diet of wrestlers being tough men who didn't need to look like Greek gods to beat other men senseless. The various executives in charge, however, desperately wanted something akin to Hulk Hogan's success and would spend years chasing that idea with various degrees of success and failure. Their attempts to duplicate the magic during Hogan's dominance up north would lead to one Lawrence Wendell Fole, better known as Lex Luger, to be pushed into a position the WCW NWA fanbase was not thrilled about. WCW's attempts to turn their roided muscular man into a success did not set the world on fire. Attempts were even made in their tag team division with the Road Warriors. Hawk and Animal, both actual human mammals, stomped mudholes throughout the WCW's tag team division while bulking up from bottles, but their combined efforts never produced the success Hogan accomplished. Perhaps if their personal and professional situations had been less tumultuous, things would have proved more fruitful. Subsequent acts of muscular enhanced men in WCW would produce some short-lived highs and disappointing lows. A muscular Superman ushering in a long period of wild success was simply not in the cards for WCW. With the WWF awash in steroids, from their owner to their agents, the WWF became an insatiable operation touring non-stop. Talent would develop not only habits with steroids but various other substances. To keep the company awash in steroids, performers developed various connections, both legal and otherwise. Most of the names have been lost to history, but one name has become synonymous with the WWF's steroid problem. Congress passed the Anabolic Steroid Act of 1990 to respond to the increasing levels of illicit traffic in steroids. Perhaps running a television show that was full of superhumanoids was a red flag to the agents responsible for enforcing the new rules, and it caught their eye.
It's pretty obvious. You can sit down and watch the show and at least decide at least a percentage of who's on and who's not.
Perhaps running a secondary product focused on even larger muscular men aroused their attention even further.
What is going on? This guy was down. Hey, I took pills bigger than you.
Certainly a wiretapped conversation between a bodybuilder buying illegal steroids from a Pennsylvania doctor who casually mentioned WWF wrestlers as fellow clients would be a tantalizing trail of breadcrumbs for agents looking to make headlines in the hopes of increasing their budgets for the ensuing fiscal years.
Vince McMahon voluntarily stepped down as head of WWF. Why?
I mean, he knew he was about to get indicted, or he had already gotten indicted, and so he was preparing for the worst.
To simplify the story, Dr. George Zahorian was found to have been illegally distributing steroids to a variety of clients, including multiple wrestlers currently and formerly on the WWF's roster.
Dr. Zahorian was a quack. I didn't like him.
You come to Pennsylvania. He was a doctor, all of our things in Pennsylvania. He'd come in, he'd take your blood pressure. He'll see, open this bag. He says, anything you need today? I'm like, no, I don't want any. No. I just had a bad feeling about Dr. Zahorian.
Ultimately receiving a 3-year prison sentence, Dr. Zahorian turned informant for the federal government on Vince McMahon and the WWF. Despite overwhelming evidence of the WWF being awash in steroids, the federal government could not prove its case, which centered more around the WWF being an illegal steroid distributor, which ultimately they were not.
What was the most embarrassing part of that one, actually, is that the package that they alleged, Zahorian sent the package FedEx to Vince with the steroids, right?
Yep.
And the show at the Nassau Coliseum that Hogan supposedly got the package was October the 18th. And when I found that out, watching the trial, I'm going, how can you make this? I mean, how did it get all the way to a trial when the dates don't match?
Oh, no.
They had like an argument for conspiracy. It wasn't very strong. But that distribution argument, it was just like, how could they claim? I mean, the distribution thing, they never had it within the district. And then the thing they had within the district, the dates just didn't match. It was impossible.
Thanksgiving Eve, Mr. Mushnick in the New York Post wrote 2 new articles. One article was entitled, Tampering Cloud Over Rustling Big's Trial. It cites unnamed federal sources as suggesting that Marty Bergman, the husband of one of my attorneys, Laura Bavetti, tampered with witnesses, obstructed justice, and caused a baseless complaint to be filed against the good guys who were Phil Mushnick's cronies with the Justice Department. The second article actually goes to the absurd depth of quoting the ever-present unnamed sources as questioning the marriage of Laura Bavetti and Marty Bergman. Now, on a personal level, I wish to state that my heart goes out to my attorney, Laura Bavetti, and her husband, Marty Bergman. Laura was an integral part of our defense team, and she defends people with a passion and a vigor that is ennobling to see and experience. I also deeply resent any innuendo or accusation that my acquittal on the charges brought against me by the federal government was in any way tainted by any illegality by me or by my legal representation.
Laura Bavetti was one scary woman.
Oh, yeah, I'd take steroids from a trash can. She said about my character, it was like, oh my God.
Do you want to know something funny, though, that came out after the case?
Love to.
Okay, is that the key witness in the case, Vince McMahon's secretary for a long time, she had a journal and it had like all these logs, and there was a lot of steroid references in her logs, a lot of them. And the secretary was approached by a guy who claimed to be an agent who wanted to do a movie on Vince, and also claimed to be a 60 Minutes producer at the same time, okay? Yeah. And so he got close to her and was talking to her, going to represent her and this and this and this and this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who he was?
Who?
Secretly, no one knew it?
Who?
The husband of Laura Bavetti.
Oh, no.
Yep. And when Laura Bavetti cross-examined, Emily Feinberg.
That's how she fit in. Oh, no, that was her husband?
It was her husband. And so when I
what a swerve.
You weren't there, but I was actually there the day that Emily Feinberg was on the stand. And I mean, Laura Bavetti, I was like amazed. I thought Laura Bavetti was the greatest attorney in the history of the world. She had ESP. She knew the days that like Emily Feinberg was like on vacation, and she knew everything. And I'm going like, oh my God, this attorney is the most well-researched attorney. And she just ripped Emily Feinberg on the stand. And then when it was over, like I don't know, it was like a good year later when these stories came out, and it was like this light bulb hit, and I go, no wonder she knew everything.
Oh, my God.
There's a lot to that trial.
I have no more questions, Dave. That's great. That puts all the pieces together.
The fallout from the case was almost immediate. The WWF began drug testing.
It should come as no surprise to you that the WWF has one of the most comprehensive drug testing, education, and rehabilitation programs in all of sports. This program will now be expanded to include testing for anabolic steroids. In short, the standards of excellence the athletes in the WWF live by will become the standard bearer for all professional sports for years to come. That's why when you see this symbol, you can be assured of drug-free sports entertainment that you and your entire family can be proud of.
Many of WWF's wrestlers began to shrink week to week. Muscle-bound madmen like the Ultimate Warrior were pushed aside, or in his case fired for failing a drug test, for the likes of Bret Hart, who was ironically doing steroids, and Yokozuna, who would set a personal goal of being the world's largest wrestler shortly before he died. The muscle-bound look was out. A much leaner Hulk Hogan made his way to WCW, and the WWF began their new generation era, which still showed signs of steroid users, but they were no longer the main focus of the show. They had been replaced by leaner and more athletic performers.
You said Lex Luger made the comment to you that Vince seen you and said, wow, and he's clean.
Yeah, because we had to be.
Thought to be safe for decades, the downside of years of steroid abuse would begin to rear its ugly head. Lyle Alzado, professional football player and professional wrestling television actor, would air his health failings publicly and contribute them to years of steroid abuse.
Please, if anybody's listening to the show, I'm sure there are a lot of people, there's no reason to do this stuff. You exchange one thing for another and it's your life.
The body count for professional wrestlers dying young began to swell. While steroids were not solely responsible for these performers dying relatively young, the trend did not go unnoticed in light of the WWF's steroid trial at the start of the decade.
It was more of a Wild West show back in the 80s, no doubt about that. And I think that, in terms of illegal drug usage, in terms of cocaine, there was quite a bit of that went on. Again, I don't throw any stones. I was a part of that whole scene myself. But as far as looking back on all of this, these individuals developed a lot of bad habits. That's not my responsibility.
While the WWF had started recreational drug testing in the late 1980s, it wasn't until in November of 1991 they made any serious attempt to test for illegal steroid use.
A promise that the World Wrestling Federation will be the standard bearer for drug-free sports and entertainment.
By 1996, random drug testing was dropped for financial reasons.
The cost of that at that time, we were not a public company, was extraordinary. We suspended that. We had to compete. We lost money. It was a private company. We lost millions of dollars for more than 1 year. And quite frankly, did not have the funds to continue this program, and especially when our competition would not.
WCW had followed a similar drug testing standard. In both companies, whatever the policies in place, either the testing was lax enough to be cheated or results were ignored unless needed as an excuse for employment reasons.
Your point of, well, we're really doing this because we want, to hang this drug test over like, Themistocles' sword. And, we need to pull it out and cut their heads off with it for PR reasons or, keep people from jumping or make them, nervous, whatever. It's just so much nonsense.
And at this point, Big Papa Pump is looking as big as a house here. Any commentary about his physique and how it starts to change?
No, other than it was obvious. I mean, what do you want me to say? I don't know what I don't know. From my point of view, he didn't show up on any drug testing protocols that were an issue for me. I didn't ask any questions. But I got to tell you, and this is again, from the advantage of 2020 hindsight and just kind of growing up, I guess, as an adult in the business, is when I see guys that are all blowed up and jacked up, now I can look at somebody when I see them on television and I can almost tell what they're on, or at least I think I can. Guys that do a lot of growth hormone look a certain way. They have certain characteristics that make it obvious, at least to me, or I think it does. None of which is answering the question that you asked. The question you asked was there anybody concerned that they weren't getting what they paid for because of the way he looked? And the answer to that is no.
This standard seemingly continues to this day, as modern WWE wellness testing is known to be circumvented with a doctor's note for prescribed medication allowances.
Look to the WWE's own policy. Performers who are caught are given only a warning for their first offense. A mere 30-day suspension for a second offense. You need to flunk a drug test 4 times before you are actually let go. Then there is the loophole.
And that basically says, if you got a prescription, you're clean.
Yeah, it's just a loophole in my mind that guts the entire program.
But it was always booze and pills in the WWE because we had doctor's prescriptions. And as long as you had a doctor's prescription, it was okay. Of course, it wasn't because, we'd have doctors write us whatever we wanted.
The prevalence of steroids in Japanese and Mexican wrestling is assumed to be relevantly rampant in both countries. Steroids are not illegal in Japan, and obtaining steroids in Mexico is not difficult. Mexico is in fact the birthplace of steroids and remains one of the largest countries of steroid manufacturing. While luchadores such as Super Porky are unlikely to be partaking, with talents like Mephisto and Sobedano openly wearing logos of companies who sell steroids on their websites, it's hard not to jump to conclusions, particularly when Mexican promotions hold bodybuilding contests. While steroids in Japan had been around in the wrestling scene since at least the 1980s, the crop of young lions arising in the 90s seemed to have a more willing indulgence towards the subject matter. The North American stars becoming larger would have undoubtedly been noticed both on television and when they came over to perform live in Japan. Their paychecks being larger were likely noticed as well. Wrestling is after all a cosmetic business, and getting bigger for both performance and monetary reasons is logical. While the more obvious signs of steroid abuse by wrestling's various North American stars had been greatly reduced by the time wrestling's territory system had finished its transformation into a near monopoly for the WWE, tragedy as usual would soon follow those who had ignored the previous generation's warnings. Eddie Guerrero was not a person without his issues of public substance abuse, but his use of various muscular enhancement substances became visibly evident during his final years employed as a WWE performer. While typically a smaller and more athletic performer, Guerrero became a physical monstrosity that seemed woefully impossible for someone who had spent the past 2 decades under 230 pounds. Eddie Guerrero and his nephew Chavo Guerrero would check into the Marriott Hotel City Center on November 12, 2005. By morning, Eddie Guerrero's heart had stopped and he had passed away tragically at what many would consider to be the zenith of a long and storied career. He was only 38 and his death certificate officially listed steroids as a contributing factor in his death.
And then I saw him go from warm to cold. He died right there.
Wow.
Right there. And, they called 911, the, ambulance came, and, they were giving him CPR and everything their way, and they're just like, he's gone. And I was like, what if I would have got here, an hour before? And usually we roomed together.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't room together. And they were like, no. They said he had, something already. He would have been gone no matter what. I'm like what?
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm sitting here with my brother, dying basically in my arms, going. I was in shock. I was in shock, and then I had to go back to my room and call people. And then I get a call from Chris Benoit. Goes, hey, where are you? I'm downstairs. We're supposed to meet at 8:00 to go work out and eat breakfast. And I'm like, Chris, sit down. Are you sitting down? He goes, yeah. So I told Chris, and Chris was like, I never heard somebody wail like that, like this deep moan, like, oh, like I just, punched him in the stomach and stole his soul. That's what it felt like, and I was like, and he was yelling and screaming and just deep. Whoa, no.
By 1985, a young man from Montreal, Quebec, Canada would have spent countless hours watching his hero, the Dynamite Kid, perform athletic maneuvers far ahead of their time inside the squared circle for the Hart family's Stampede Wrestling promotion. The young man, Chris Benoit, followed his hero's footsteps nearly step by step.
He does admit holding a shotgun to her head, but insists he was not violent.
I don't think it was violent. I mean, I put a shotgun under her chin once. I had no shells. I only pretended that.
This is the man Chris Benoit idolized.
I'd like to dedicate these boots to a young man who I do believe, will be the superstar of the 90s. Ed, that's Chris Benoit.
I will pass them on. I'm a little overwhelmed.
Both were small men in a big man's business. Both were more than willing to put in the hard work required to maintain a fantastic physique that was made slightly easier to obtain through chemistry. Sadly, both of their careers would end tragically. Dynamite packed pounds of muscle into his small human frame, both to help him stand out and survive taking grueling bumps in a time when professional wrestling rings were not designed to modern safety standards. The cost would be heavy. His agility, once hailed to be the best in the world, would turn to dust as years of taking bumps in hard rings combined with hard living would turn the Dynamite performer into a wheelchair-bound mortal, a broken shell of what he once was.
You said that even if you knew the dangers of steroids, you'd do it again. What if some up-and-coming wrestler came up to you and said, Dynamite, I love everything in the business. I'm too small. Should I do steroids or not? What would you say to a guy that was looking to you for advice, a guy who'd gone through it?
Do what he wants.
Do what he wants?
Yeah. As I said, do what he wants.
Benoit was undoubtedly aware of his hero's fate, but he was seemingly undeterred by it. He would spend the decades of his professional career becoming bulkier than his 5'6" frame should have been. In one of Eddie Guerrero's final pay-per-view matches, he and Benoit would square off inside an ECW-branded ring for the WWE, who had bought the rights to the brand after the company's demise. Both men, despite being over 10 years older than the last time they had performed for ECW, displayed more muscle mass than before. Muscle mass decreases approximately 3 to 8% per decade after the age of 30.
But one of the earliest hallmarks of aging is the loss of skeletal muscle. So unfortunately, we achieve peak muscle mass by our early 40s. And after that point, we have a progressive deterioration in some that might equal up to 50% by the time they reach their 80s or 90s.
In regards to how ECW treated steroids before their closure in 2000, the running joke in ECW's locker room was how you couldn't get a job there unless you failed a drug test.
In our company, basically, if you passed the drug test, you got fired. But it's true, though. I mean, everybody was messed up. So, but everybody kept it within reason for the most part. Very rarely did people get completely out of hand.
Needless to say, there was no drug testing in ECW. What happened in Chris Benoit's final days were unquestionably not a byproduct of using performance-enhancing drugs, but steroids being found in his home after the horrific murder-suicide would again bring about questions of why these substances always seem to show up around untimely deaths within the professional wrestling industry.
Nothing from the WWE, under any set of circumstances, had anything at all to do with Chris Benoit murdering his family. How did we know that Chris Benoit would turn into a monster?
In his autopsy, Chris Benoit was shown to have enormous amounts of testosterone in his body. Testosterone is still a steroid that's banned in all major sports. It directly leads to increased muscle growth. Some folks have said he had 10 times the normal amount of testosterone in his body as a normal human.
And did Benoit pass the wellness program check leading up to the murders?
Yes, preposterously, Chris Benoit passed the wellness checks leading up to the murder, despite the irrefutable fact that he was taking enormous amounts of steroids.
When Benoit did what he did, everybody wanted to point at one thing, pointed to steroids. Well, it wasn't steroids. It was the steroids and the other drugs and the booze and the lifestyle of being on the road and running it hard and going through injuries and losing people. He lost his best friend and having an ex-wife that was already taking tons of child support and alimony from him. And now, if you read the rumors, it looked like Nancy was getting ready to do the same thing to him, so he was going to have another situation where he was going to be divorced twice, and he was tired and exhausted, and you start to see it's not just one particular thing.
Dr. Phil Aston, Benoit's personal doctor, would end up receiving a 10-year prison sentence after pleading guilty to 175 counts of illegally distributing prescription drugs, due to an investigation that began after his name was found on bottles in the Benoit home.
He was a patient of Dr. Aston's, and there was testimony and evidence we had that showed that he was abusing prescription drugs that he got from Dr. Aston.
In the fallout of the Chris Benoit tragedy, Ken Kennedy, a WWE performer at the time, defended the WWE, saying there was no steroid use in the company.
So I look at WWE wrestlers, and not just WWE, other wrestlers and the kind of people that you're talking about who used to be in the profession, look to me like they're taking these kind of drugs. Are you telling me that they're not?
No, we actually have a drug policy in place right now, and we're regularly tested.
His name was included with the signature pharmacy clientele list, and he began a 30-day suspension. The other WWE performers outed as buying PEDs from the Florida pharmacy were also suspended by the company, if they hadn't already left. With the spotlight of steroids in wrestling being newsworthy again, the WWE quickly took action and began implementing new drug testing measures that included suspensions and termination punishments with more transparency regarding how the process worked.
We went out to Signature Pharmacy
thing came out, I knew I had nothing to do with signature pharmacy. I knew I hadn't ordered anything online. I knew I wasn't a part of that. And I relayed that to the company, and I wasn't protected. They didn't step up for me, so I knew it was time for me to leave that company.
I wanted to ask you if you, just a quick thing. Number one, do you have any idea how your name would have come up if you had nothing to do with that?
How I would have gotten involved in that, and how my name would have come up in that. I really can't answer that question, but, I believe in conspiracy theories, I don't believe, JFK was just shot by Lee Harvey Oswald and his brain came up missing, and several years later. I believe in conspiracy theories. I believe that, perhaps I was a scapegoat, and perhaps if I wouldn't have said anything about it, or left the company, it would have looked bad on me, but not bad on them. So, in that aspect, I feel like, maybe that's what happened. I don't know.
Although the enforcing of these rules and punishments seem to waver depending on which talent fails. When WWE performer Brock Lesnar failed a United States anti-doping agency drug test for steroids over a decade later, he received no punishment from the WWE.
You're just so big, and you come out of the world of pro wrestling.
We're done. Thanks, guys. I know what he's asking.
Moments after Lesnar walked out of the interview, he addressed the speculation about steroid use.
I have never failed a f***ing drug test.
I'm a white boy, and I'm jacked. Deal with it.
But when you get arrested for steroids and you fail UFC drug tests and you're still telling everybody, I don't take steroids, and apparently the drug testing policy these days excludes part-timers. It's only for full-timers.
I've heard that.
It does seem like there is, and maybe that's all rumor and innuendo. Maybe it's all bullshit. But isn't this one of those where there's smoke, there's fire type situations?
I don't know, and I really don't care. I don't care if they all do steroids.
But one time, Steve was on one of those rages, and he put a gun to my head and said, Deborah, if you're so upset with me, why don't you pull the trigger? And I'm like, Steve, calm down, take your finger off the trigger. I mean, who's to say that that second couldn't have been, and I would have been dead? It's stuff like that. It's
Deborah,
crazy.
How often did that kind of incident happen?
That would happen all the time.
All of WWE's part-time performers, including Brock Lesnar, are in fact not subjected to WWE's drug testing policy. WWE's concern or interest in combating steroid use in their company continues to be shrouded in doubt. On another channel, TNA Wrestling, now known as Impact Wrestling, was also caught up in the whirlwind of the Chris Benoit murder-suicide. Appearing before Congress, TNA President Dixie Carter stated in 2008 her company did in fact test their guys regularly, despite employing a man who balked at doing a steroid test for the WWE and several others who would be named in the signature pharmacy scandal the previous year.
When I went up to the WWE, they called me and they called my lawyer and said, oh, they want to drug test you. I said, yeah, fine, sure, have Hunter pick them up in limo. They'll both go together. That was the end of that.
In a document submitted to Congress, the WWE admitted from their baseline testing, 68 of their performers tested positive for anabolic steroids. Congress did nothing with this information. Advancements in performance-enhancing drugs have largely pushed anabolic steroids to a somewhat background role. While some wrestlers are likely still using various forms of steroids, testosterone replacement therapy, HGH and various other substances have proved to be physically enhancing without many of steroids' alleged negative side effects, including gynecomastia, a condition Dwayne Johnson had surgery for.
Steroids, human growth hormones, and the quest for bigger people in this industry. You like big guys, right?
Well, again, I take exception to the fact that, our locker room now in terms of weight, as far as big guys are concerned, is lighter than it's ever been in history.
As a result, am I going to see smaller and smaller wrestlers in the ring?
I think over time the impact of the program will be that we will see healthier wrestlers in the ring.
Stricter diets and a larger concern with one's well-being after watching those who came before them die young, undoubtedly played some part as well. Still, there are various performers who seemingly are more than willing to push the limits of body dysmorphia at any cost. While it is doubtful a PED-free state-of-the-art form will exist again, medical advances will continue to push boundaries that entice performers to push their own physical limitations to entertain their audiences and attract the eyes of those willing to pay them to do so.
And even critics concede promoters are rich enough and fan mania is deep enough to ride out the storm.
This is not going to wreck professional wrestling.
Oh, no. Professional wrestling, no. Professional wrestling will be around forever.